Okay, so next up, I'd like to introduce Gwen Brewer. Gwen Brewer works for the Department of Natural Resources, and she has been leading the effort. She's been leading the effort to revise the State Wildlife Action Plan, and she's here to talk about that provision, about the State Wildlife Action Plan.
Good afternoon. I'm really pleased to have the opportunity to speak to such a great group of like-minded people about the State Wildlife Action Plan. Some of you helped us with putting input into it, and as I'm going to tell you at the end, you all have the opportunity to put some input into it as of very recently. I'm going to step very quickly through this just to give you a good idea of what in the heck is a State Wildlife Action Plan, what is in it, and give you a little bit more detail on some of the bird information and really where we're going to go with it. After me, we'll have someone from DC talk about their Wildlife Action Plan. It's something that all 50 states are required to do to receive a certain funding source. So it's really a great backdrop for conservation in the state. We had a plan that was first put into place in 2005, so this is the 10-year revision of that plan. It's meant to drive not only the focus of DNR, but really be an action plan for the whole state and for all of the folks that are in it. It's not a regulatory document, something which has been very much of interest to our current administration, whether it is regulatory or it is not. And it's required for the continued receipt of federal state wildlife grant funds. And I just wanted to flash this up here very quickly. I don't think a lot of people in the state necessarily know that the Natural Heritage Program, which I'm part of, and even the Wildlife and Heritage Service, people that are working on game and non-game animals and plants, including birds, we basically get almost zero funds from the general funds from the state. We are essentially a federally funded unit in the state of Maryland. And except for half of our funding comes from that tax checkoff. So I'm going to make a blatant little plug right now to, as you're doing your taxes, if you haven't done them yet, there's a little checkoff thing for Chesapeake Bay and Endangered Species Fund. That's providing about half of the funds that we have for work in the state on endangered species and on non-game plants and animals as well. This state wildlife grant funding that comes from the U.S. Congress, it's an annual appropriation, and it is about half of our funding for the work that we do. And as you can see, like many sources of federal funding, it's declined, so we're always working to try to do more with less, like everybody else. And most of the remaining funds for the program come from federal sources, and then half of it from that checkoff. So very limited state general funds are coming to us. Okay, well, what in the heck happened with that 2005 plan that some of you, I hope, know about and maybe were involved in? We've done a lot of inventory, monitoring, and research work, technical assistance, restoring habitats, developing a good solid database on information on the animals and plants in the state, and some conservation planning. Got a picture there, surveying for cave species in the upper right and invasive species management for Phragmites at Parker's Creek down in the lower right. Well, all of the states doing this plan have to meet particular requirements that the Fish and Wildlife Service has set out, and those requirements include these particular elements that we have to address in our plan. We have to determine species of greatest conservation need, what the wildlife habitats are that support them, threats to those species and habitats, conservation actions that can address those threats, how we're going to monitor both how species and habitats are doing and also the effectiveness of our own actions, and then collaboration with partners and input from the public and stakeholders. Well, certainly the collaboration with partners piece was a key element for us on the revision this time around. we really felt it was important to try to engage people and get their input in there, think about plans that other people have, so that this is a plan that's ready for implementation. It's not a plan that's supposed to go sit on a shelf somewhere. We involved a variety of federal, state, local agencies, tribes, lots of citizens, contacted a lot of organizations, requested input on species lists. And then these pictures at the bottom are from some of these taxa group workshops. You might see some familiar faces, except maybe those of you in the way back that can't tell in the lower right there. And then in the meantime, as we've been working on the plan, we've sent some email updates. Part of the plan was put out for comment several months ago, and only recently have we put the entire plan out for public comment, and I'll come to that later. This last piece is really important. As I said, we wanted to set this up so that we are ready to implement. And part of that implementation is to hold follow-up meetings after the plan has been approved. And one of the very important groups that you'll hear a little bit more about later today relative to birds and implementation is the formation of a new Maryland Bird Conservation Initiative. And we envision really trying to take the conservation actions and the threats, which I'll show you some examples in a moment, out there to citizen groups that are working on these kinds of things that can help with these conservation actions that are needed to really move forward these habitat and conservation plans for other species in the state. Well, what's a species of greatest conservation need anyway? We had to identify native animals. We're thinking about terrestrial and aquatic here that are at risk or declining. So they might be species that are already, for example, on our state endangered species list, but they might be species that are in decline. And part of the point of this planning effort, and certainly an aspect of the funding that Congress very much supports, is let's keep common species common. Let's keep things off of endangered species lists. Let's do something about it before we get to the point where maybe there isn't anything we can do about it anymore. So we have some species that are on our state list, some not. This list is long, which is kind of depressing, I guess, in some senses, but it's reality. We have 610 total species on that list, 143 of which are birds. For this revision round, we added 24 species of birds compared to the 2005 plan, and we took 22 off for various reasons. And some of the examples here, for example, we added rusty blackbird, several seabirds, yellow-breasted chat. We took off some of the birds that, based on the breeding bird atlas results that a number of you contributed to, showed that they really were doing pretty well in the state and across the state, and things like red-eyed vireo and hairy woodpecker were removed from the list of greatest conservation need species. Not that they don't still have conservation need, but they're not in that kind of upper tier. That 610 total species on that list, one reason that that list is rather large is that this year we added 127 species of insects. And so we've really been trying to increase our knowledge of insects, and we know more about their conservation needs, so that in some part explains why that list is so large. Well, what's a key wildlife habitat? It supports a species in greatest need of conservation. And in the plan, we have example photos, and then there's a map on the right that shows the basic location of that particular habitat type in the state. And there are 58 of those key wildlife habitats. They're both terrestrial and aquatic. And it also includes some man-made kind of habitats. Like, well, we don't have a lot of old-growth forest anymore. We don't have a lot of hollow trees for chimney swifts to be in. But we have some old chimneys. And so there are some habitats like that that you might not think about as your sort of key wildlife habitats, but that can be very critical for particular species. And in the plan, this is a good reference for these different kinds of habitats in the state and what species are associated with them. And we also included this time around some plants and rare plant communities of interest that are also with these key wildlife habitats. This plan is meant to be a wildlife plan, but we very much recognize how critical habitat is to the whole picture, and plants are part of that, and we're really trying to promote that kind of more holistic view of conservation and what needs to happen. That focus on habitat can be really critical. Well, what about threats in the plan? This was a new chapter, as was the Conservation Actions chapter in this revision of the plan compared to what we did the first time around. And frankly, so far politically, this has given us the most grief, the threat chapter, because we use a standard set of threat categories that all the northeastern states agreed to use, and DC, so that we could look at a regional level at threats and kind of compile together the results from these state wildlife action plans to really address things on larger scales too. So these categories that we needed to address, potential impacts from land use, energy production, transportation, not too popular. Modifications of natural systems, use of biological resources, invasive species. This includes native species having an impact, like white-tailed deer over browse, pollution, climate change. Climate change got its own chapter this time around because there's been so much developed and increasing concern. We have different resource management needs, recreation needs, education and outreach needs, and even administrative needs. So these can be a threat in the sense that it's an unmet need. So those are all the different kinds of things that we've put some general information on in the plan. And then the main point is to address those threats with conservation actions. So every conservation action is linked to a threat. We also prioritized the actions, and we prioritized them thinking about implementation. There are many things that it would be great to know, it would be helpful to know, but maybe they're just not realistic. We know we're never going to have the money. We know we're never going to have the resources in terms of expertise maybe. There are lots of things that are high priorities, but we really wanted to make it things that really had some chance of getting implemented. And so that was taken into account in the prioritization system. And then also, this is just a really good resource that I wanted to let you and those of you associated with organizations know about. In the appendices of the plan, those conservation actions linked to threats are presented for birds under different key wildlife habitats. So you can look and see for a particular forest type, what are the threats and conservation actions. You can also look at these different categories of bird groups and look and see what are the conservation actions and what are the priority ones, what are the threats that they're addressing. So we hope that this is really a good tool for everybody to use to kind of help us target our efforts a little bit better than maybe we have in the past, and look for those places where we can collaborate to address the threats. Here's just some examples. So one example threat for upland forest systems, habitat fragmentation, which Dave Person has already mentioned. I'm sure it'll come up again. What species are affected? Forest interior breeding birds. And what's one of the conservation actions that was thought to be a high priority? Working with county governments to site developments outside of large forest blocks. And that was an urgent need, had good benefits, relatively low cost, and collateral benefits for other species as well. One more example, coastal systems, human disturbance a problem. Dave and I really did not coordinate on our presentations here. It's sounding like it, isn't it? But human disturbance, like that new island, Turn Island, species affected, in addition to the ones here, some of the other breeding terns that we have. What's a conservation action? Working to restrict beach use during critical seasons. And then just lastly, early successional habitat, a need to provide technical assistance. We have an opportunity to work with the utility companies to try to get a better set of vegetation conditions out there for species that we're concerned about, and also to benefit other species. Even though these conservation actions can be laid out in terms of just birds or just mammals or something, as I said, we're really trying to focus on habitat, and we really want to think about what can we do that helps a whole group of species that's all part of that same system. So it's not such a bird-centric plan, but there is a lot of good stuff for people that are looking specifically for bird actions in it. The public comment period opened recently when we were finally given permission to tell people that the draft wildlife action plan was indeed online. So you have until May 8th to send your comments in. It's posted online under the DNR website. I'll give you some more details on that in a moment, but it's by chapter. They're PDF files that have links in the table of contents, so if you just want to look at a particular section, it's easy for you to do so. There's a lot of great information in it, and we really hope that people will have a look and really think about those conservation actions that are proposed. Are they the priorities? Are there ones that we missed? Are there some other aspects that we just didn't consider that we should have in trying to put together this big thing that's supposed to be a wildlife action plan for the whole state and really for everybody to use and help focus on. So the easiest way to find it, as usual, I can give you the web link there, but it's this like long, convoluted kind of looking thing. So the easiest thing to do, either Google Maryland State Wildlife Action Plan revision, or go to the Department of Natural Resources webpage, and there's a wildlife link, and then underneath that, kind of at the bottom, there's a little picture of a little Baltimore checker spot down there, I think is what's currently up there. And there's a place to click about State Wildlife Action Plan revision. We'll accept comments by mail, by email, and this is an address, and certainly if you're having any trouble finding something, feel free to email this address, and our Wildlife Action Plan coordinator, Ingrid Rothman, will get back to you. Or there's even an online comment form, so it makes it very easy to collect the comments from yourselves and other stakeholders. I'd really encourage you to spread the word that this is out there now. We'll be sending out an email to all the people that helped us in our workshops, but there are other organizations that we really appreciate you spreading the word to so that people know about this. I don't know what kind of pushback we're going to get on particular aspects of the plan, so if you see things in there that are positive as well as negative, those are always good comments for us to get as well. So that's all I have, and I'll be happy to answer questions, I guess, later, if you want to track me down.
Yeah, I think
so.
we can do that. It's time for shipping. Well, thank you very much.